Welcome back, everyone, to the T.R.O.N podcast, The Randomness of Nothing. Your host, Rashad Woods. Very special guest today, all the way from the UK, originally from Mozambique, which is he's a world traveler, financial guru, very successful entrepreneur. Right now in Plymouth, UK, Mr. Tony Redondo. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
You have such a fascinating background. So, how does a man with Portuguese background come from Mozambique, get into the financial industry, have interest in martial arts, rugby, and basketball, and then eventually come up with this phenomenal currency exchange, Cosmos? It's amazing.
Why you put it like that?
Yeah, dude, it's stellar. It's unbelievable. I had to keep scrolling just to be like, it was so fascinating reading your life. Your life.
One of the things that life has taught me, Rashad, is it's important to make plans, but they're loose guidelines. They're not a script.
Right.
And I look back over my 58 years on this planet, and most things that have happened to me have happened, I wouldn't say by accident, that's unfair, but it's happened because I've had my eyes and ears open rather than I meant to go in that direction.
Right.
So I was born in Mozambique in Africa because at the time it was a Portuguese colony. My parentage is Portuguese. And I had an absolutely amazing, idyllic early childhood because we lived 200 yards away from the Indian Ocean, where water temperature is 23 degrees centigrade, air temperature 26 degrees, and the local park was one of the big game reserves in South Africa next door called the Kruger National Park.
Okay.
And, and so seeing the big six around the watering hole and all the rest of it, that was just every weekend. Or
goodness, man. I mean, that's incredible to live near that, right?
Exactly. It was just, a really, really interesting sort of natural, upbringing. And the name Cosmos and, of the business comes from those days because, of course, when it gets dark, you get that real darkness with no light pollution,
right?
In that part of Africa, certainly in those days, and so it's pitch dark. And so the Milky Way is just a canopy of stars behind, absolutely above you. And the thing is, because of the tilt of the Earth, the southern hemisphere points towards the middle of the Milky Way.
Okay.
Northern hemisphere points away. So for every star that we see in the northern hemisphere, there are hundreds of stars in the south.
That you'll never see.
So, I was always fascinated, and I was lucky enough that my godfather was really knowledgeable about astronomy. To stop me, I've always been curious by nature. So my parents tell a story that to stop me running off into the bush because I thought I heard something, they would put a couple of blankets up on top of the car bonnet.
Yeah.
And my godfather will sit up there with me and hold my hand and point out Venus and Mars and the asteroid belt and all the rest of it. So I've always had a fascination with all things up there.
Correct.
And so when I came fast forward 50 odd years, when I came to start my company, I only had one name in my head. So thank goodness he was available at company's house.
It was still that's shocking to me that was like you would think that would have been taken, right? Because you just hear it all the time in casual talk. Like,
exactly.
Whether it's a movie, whether it's, a character, whether it's in a kid's cartoon, right? Like, that's crazy that was available.
I was so surprised. I'm very grateful because if it hadn't been available, I'd have no idea what to call my business. Absolutely. I'd have just chosen the first name available,
Right. For sure.
But then things happened, and there was a revolution in Portugal, which overthrew a 50-year fascist dictatorship. Colonies were given away. We were evacuated out, went back to Portugal, and my parents decided to emigrate to the UK in 1975. Not a word of English between the lot of us. Didn't know anybody, different culture, different climate. It was a real culture shock.
Oh, for sure, I can imagine.
Like Africa, I've always lived in a multicultural society.
Right.
Because of the Portuguese colonies in Mozambique, we had Indians from Goa, we had Chinese from Macau, we had the locals, we had Portuguese. So, and then we settled in the East End of London, which again is very multicultural. So that made me feel very much at home.
Nice. That's good,
which is great. Went to local school, loved sport, hated school, to be honest. I was a bit of a tearaway, in all honesty. But then at the age of 19, without really a clue as to what I wanted to do with my life, an opportunity arose. And the opportunity was that this is now 1985, and the financial services get completely turned on its head by the government passing a piece of legislation which
Thatcher, right?
liberalised financial services, and all the international banks flooded into London.
Right.
Beforehand, you had to know the right people and go to the right schools to get into the City of London. After that, we had so many banks coming in, they needed staff. And luckily for me, about the only thing other than sport I was reasonably good at school was maths.
Gotcha.
So I thought to myself, banking, maths, yeah, okay.
Comparable
So-
skills, easy to transfer over.
Exactly. So
Right.
that was my career decision done. And I joined the bank. I studied in the evenings. I worked my way up the career path. But again, when I look back with the wonderful benefit of hindsight, I was so lucky in that in those days, bank managers were still bank managers. And there was only one way of doing business, and that was to provide a personal service to each client. Because, of course, mid-1980s, there was no computers. There was no
Right.
internet. There was
Right.
no email.
Right.
Business was done the only way business had been done for hundreds of years.
So if you had a bad relationship, you would go to somebody you had a good relationship with, right? And
Exactly. So that's the only thing I learned. Now, fast forward into sort of the early noughties, and all of a sudden the email comes in and the internet comes in,
right.
and you've now got a situation that in the last 10, 15 years of my 35-year corporate career, all of a sudden technology completely takes over.
Yep.
So that now you have hundreds of currency brokers out there,
Yes.
but 99.9% of them don't employ staff, don't have a telephone number on their website. It's a one-size-fits-all platform.
Yes.
You, the client, has to log in. You, the client, has to self-service. And that causes clients untold grief for two obvious reasons. The first one is currency exchange rates change every 3 seconds, night and day.
I saw
Who
that.
on earth,
Yeah.
who on earth has the time to sit there watching it?
Yeah.
And even if you did have the time, would you actually know what you're looking for? What the signals are in amongst all the market noise?
Well, what's
So that's
crazy is,
problem number one.
you know what, I don't want to cut you off, but I remember I watched a documentary about the putting down of the transatlantic cable line once, right? And it was
Yes.
like, right, and people don't realize that even though that one in particular, like from my understanding, I don't want to get this wrong, isn't still working. There's thousands of these that are around, hundreds of these around the globe, and that was the first fiber optic internet to get commodity and currency prices in real time.
Exactly.
By
It's
way,
still
telegraph.
working.
Yeah.
The original cable still exists.
Yeah.
We used to live in a little village 3 miles away from it.
Really? Wasn't that place down in like Newfoundland or something like that, or Newfoundland, or
Newfoundland to Porthcurno in
yeah,
Cornwall, where
Yeah.
I'm based.
that is
So I
bonkers.
visited the beach that
That's
the
crazy.
cable runs from.
Yeah, I was blown away. I don't want to derail the conversation, but like when you said that immediately thought of that. So please continue.
There's a little hut about half a mile in from the beach
Yeah.
in Cornwall, which is
Yeah.
a Marconi hut.
Okay.
And that was the original station that they put the cable underneath the beach all the way across the Atlantic to
That is
North America. And that's why
Okay.
pound to dollar exchange rate is still called cable.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. And so it's crazy because I saw that little hut in the documentary, but
Yeah, that's right. I
That's
visited
amazing.
that. I used to live 3 miles away from there.
Oh my God,
So
that is insane. That is insane.
that's really, that was interesting. Going back to sort of, the brokers, and the trouble for clients self-service is, again, big change in my working lifetime is that when I first started pre-computers, the difficulty was in finding out the information.
Of course.
You were either in on the inside or you weren't. That's
Right.
it.
Right.
Now there's so much information. We drown in information, but
Right.
90% of it is market noise. And what you need is a little bit of experience and a little bit of expertise to work out the difference between the market signals and
Mhm.
just noise. Because that can. But on a platform where you log in and you have to self-service, it's a totally reactive setup. You say, I'm visiting Italy in the summer. I need to buy some euros. The brokerage gives you a quote. You accept the quote or you don't. That's it. Which is a terrible way of doing it, because who's to say that's the right time? Who's to say you have to do it straight away? But because you're not talking to another human being, you don't get any options. You don't get any guidance.
But people are getting burned because they get an immediate satisfaction from something that's placed in front of them with it.
Correct.
They haven't done their homework and they're taking advantage of people's lack of homework.
Completely. And then the second problem is the actual mechanics of the transaction in terms of doing the banking. So you guys in the States, you've got your routing number and the SWIFT number and account number.
Yep.
But if you're visiting the UK, we don't use any of that. We use sort code and account number.
Yeah. Really?
If you visit Italy, they don't use any of that.
Okay.
They use IBAN and a bit code. So can you imagine the stress clients go through where you're on this platform, you have to do everything yourself, you're putting in the coordinates, the money goes out of your American account, and
it's
3 days later, you get a phone call from the host in Italy saying, I thought you were going to pay me.
Right.
Oh. Now what do you do?
And you hit send, and you thought everything was all good and gravy.
And you then go back on that platform, and there isn't even a telephone number to call.
Jeez, oh Pete. That's a nightmare.
You
get swindled. And you can't call, right? You have to email or try to talk to a chat box.
Exactly.
Oh.
You know the funniest thing about these chat box? It's hilarious.
I got to hear this.
Bearing in mind the perspective of a market, financial market, where the exchange rates change every 3 seconds, night and day. So with these chat box, you put your question in, you press return or enter, and up comes this message. Your business is important to us. We will get back to you in the next 72 hours.
Which is just a lifetime. I mean, you wouldn't wait 3 days for anything. Anything.
Exactly.
Nothing.
Exactly.
Let alone your money.
Even in Cornwall, I can order something on Amazon. It'll be here tomorrow morning, and that's in a little remote part of the UK.
That's crazy.
So waiting 72 hours is a nightmare. So for years, I had this growing idea of setting up a brokerage that uses technology, but provides a very personalized service that I grew up with when I started my career.
Right.
Where the client doesn't have to self-service. What the client does is have a conversation with me and tells me exactly what their requirements are.
Right.
What they're looking at doing, the time frame, their availability, their cash flow, their availability of funds, everything that's important to you. And then my job is to work out the best solution for you.
Right. And so, what was interesting was some of the stories that you had given up, not given up, that you actually told on your platform and your website, the testimonials, and they hit really home. Like here's, you had Tony, the Air Force colonel that was retired, that's getting his pension from overseas, right? And I'm sure, like I haven't been in the military, but you always watch like House Hunters. I'm not sure what they have over there, but there's lots of people who want to buy property overseas and over in the States that they don't factor in that one huge piece of information of currency exchange, currency fluctuation, and the difficulty involved. And when you're trying to deal with your pension, the absolute last thing on your mind is a chat box, right? Can't happen. Exactly. Can't happen. Right. When you hit that point, I was like, man, his service makes a lot of sense. They could talk to somebody who sets that up for them because they worked hard for where they got. And they can talk to you and your team, and then you're hitting the market. Like to your point, you didn't say you were clandestine, right? You said, but you have enough. Like you're not a predictor of future, right? Nobody predicted COVID, right? None. And so, but the way that you frame that service, people selling their houses, pensions, overseas college, medical expenses, things like that. Like, man, that makes a lot of sense with the gap that you filled.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I always say to people, anybody who tells you they can read the market, run away from, because it's complete BS. There is no way. I have 40 years experience in financial services and I can't read the market, but that doesn't mean it's a blind guess. What it is it goes from a blind guess on these automated platforms to an educated guess. Yeah. So there are black swan events, to use market phraseology, like COVID, that nobody saw coming.
Correct.
But in norm day, that certain things move the markets a certain way. So a very simple example. One of the key statistics I always look out for is the monthly inflation data from the major economies. Because, simple rule of economics, all the major central banks are responsible for keeping inflation under control.
Correct.
They usually have that target. It's usually around 2%. So if inflation comes in higher than expected, the normal response from the central bank, the Fed in your case, or the Bank of England in mine, would be to increase interest rates.
Correct.
That increases borrowing costs.
Correct.
Slows the economy down.
Right. To decrease buying.
But Also, what it does with the currency is if you're an international investor and you can see that the inflation rate's higher than expected in the States, and the Fed will be under pressure to put up interest rates, that means if you put your money in dollars, you're going to get a better return on your
Right.
money
Right.
because the interest rate's going to go up.
Exactly.
So guess what happens to the dollar? It strengthens.
Right.
It
Right.
happens. It's a good rule of thumb. It's not science, but it's a
Right.
good rule of thumb.
So you have good predictor models based on past, how the
We
current.
got hundreds, well, not hundreds, but we got 80 years of data in terms of inflation and unemployment and retail sales and
Right.
property data. GDP is very important.
Yes.
Interest rate differentials. It's where
Right.
you get something called a carry trade. If you're a major player, if you're a major company, and you know that, for example, interest rates in the UK are 4.5%, interest rates in Europe are 2.5%, it doesn't take too much to work out that what you ought to do, first of all, that makes the pound strong against the euro. And then secondly, what you ought to do if you've got the different currency accounts is buy the euro at a good rate and then borrow in euros because you'll be paying a smaller rate of interest than you
Right.
would do borrowing in UK because of the lower interest rates in the Eurozone. So there's all kinds of these rules of thumbs that you learn over the years. And goodness,
Right.
I've been doing this for 40 years.
Yeah.
So, that I can help my clients. That's why I think our business model works, because it starts with what's important to the client. What is it you need to do? What's important to you? Is it convenience? Is it speed? Is it the best rate? Do you need to save money? Do you need to make money? What are your circumstances? And then we build our answer around that.
So this is where the ignorance of a guy stateside, because we have 50 states and we have all similar banks across 50 states, right? And so I've never been to Europe. So you guys, but you still have different countries that have their own currencies, but the euro is kind of the standard based on countries that are in the European Union. But even then, you could still have issues with somebody buying or selling property or getting a pension if they were from Italy and then they decided to go to France, or, now that the UK has obviously left the EU. How do people deal in the European Union or inside of Europe when they have their own separate currency, but they want to peg to the euro? That's where you can still step in, right?
I can still step in. That's right. So, for example, we deal with the Polish zloty for Poland, Czech krona for the Czech Republic, the Hungarian forint for Hungary, Danish krona for Denmark. There's loads and loads of these currencies. And the other thing that's important also is the thing with the United States is it reminds me a lot of the banking scene when I first started back in these, where a big chunk of the industry is still controlled by a handful of banks.
Correct. That is very
true. 5
true.
banks in your case.
That is correct. That is very true.
So the issue with that, of course, to give you some perspective, Rashad. So I believe over 90% market share in the United States banking scene is owned by 5 banks. In the City of London in the UK, there are 652 banks registered. And
Seriously?
all those banks only control 45% of the market.
So a lot of it is really small banks as well, too, and local.
So it's very competitive, the British market. Which is why it's the only financial market that London is bigger than New York. So the stock market is bigger in New York, the commodity markets are bigger in New York, but London is the foreign exchange. And I have, as a licensed broker, I have a direct feed into London rates.
That's crazy. Again, I know you also have a U.S. one. So you said you have a U.S. dollar collection account right in New York City. So for somebody who's listening, for the baseline, hey, I'm a teacher, I retired, I did everything right. And now I decide I want to live me and my husband, did all the things right. We want to buy our dream house in Spain. Where do you step in?
Right. So if you don't use a service like mine, what you do is you go through your bank. The bank does the conversion of the dollar to euro and sends the money. But the spread is big, and the transaction will be done when you walk into the bank and ask them to do it. That's it.
Notice that on your website, right? And so, it's a time when you walk in the door, not when the market is being timed.
Exactly. Whereas what I will do, so Then you got option B, which is these automated apps. The problem with these automated apps is you have got to get your dollars into a dollar account in London or in Frankfurt in Germany. The problem with that is that you can't do it online because online banking in the States only works domestically, not internationally.
Yes, it does. Yep.
So you have got to go into the bank, and the bank will go, certainly, Mr. Woods, no problem at all, Mr. Woods. That'll be $50, please, just to make the transfer.
Right.
So where the Cosmos solution comes in is because our bank account is not in London or Frankfurt, but it's in New York.
Right.
You can jump online 24/7, free of charge, and move your funds by ACH bank transfer from your account to my collection account in New York. Nice and convenient, free of charge. We move the funds from New York to London, but we cover that cost, and nothing happens automatically. All that will happen in this circumstance is I'll phone you up and say, Mr. Woods, good news, $50,000 for your deposit on your Spanish villa has come in. However, the dollar's taking a bit of a bashing at the moment because of the Trump trade tariffs. You know, it's dropped about 3% this month so far against the euro. Do you need to pay this straight away, or have you got a little bit of time on your hands? Obviously, if you need to do it straight away, you need to do it straight away. But if you say to me, oh no, the deposit's due by the end of April, I would say to you, under today's circumstances, Trump, these trade tariffs are a ploy. I don't think they're the end game. So at some point, because nobody wins out of tariffs, so all Trump is doing is letting everybody know who's the boss and to come round to his way of thinking, in my opinion.
Okay,
so it's a ploy rather than the end game, which means I believe deals will be cut.
Well, because markets have been open, in various countries with various currencies for, hundreds of years, right? So,
Exactly.
it doesn't get done in a vacuum, right? So more or less, you're going to tell that customer to ride the market out, like this is the best advice for this particular situation, unless you need to do it right now.
Exactly. Under today's circumstances, if you're buying euros from the dollar and you can afford to wait, I would wait. Because I think the dollar will come back.
Right.
Interesting you mentioned Spain, but actually, because of my Portuguese background, I happen to know for a fact that 5 years ago, Americans emigrating to Portugal wasn't even in the top 10.
It's huge now.
Today, second place behind the British.
It's crazy because I'll go on CNBC and you kept hearing all these people what's the best place for Americans to, after they retire? And I'm like, Portugal. And I saw it, and then I saw it like 6 months later, and then you keep seeing it repeating, and you're like, man, seriously? Low cost.
And I've done quite a few transactions. Cosmos is a member of AFPOP, which is the Association of Foreign Property Owners in Portugal.
Man.
And it all started, this is a typical story that sums up my life. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're members of this AFPOP association. The phone rings. It's an American lady in Portugal, originally from Arizona, in Portugal, saying, is that Tony? Yes, yeah. How can I help? We heard you on a podcast about 2 years ago. We're in Portugal. We've tried to buy a property 3 times, and 3 times we can't get the money out of Bank of America because we have to physically be there to sign the piece of paper in front of them. But we're in Portugal.
Right.
Now, we've just found another property that we really, really love. Is there any way you can help us around this? So I said, of course. No problem at all.
Right.
You register with your Arizona address. I'll give you the details of the New York account. You move the funds there. You let me know the time frame. I'll do the rest for you. It sounds far too simple, she says. Well, I'll send you the information. You check it out. Let me know.
Right.
Long story short, over a period of 6 weeks last summer, she registered. The dollars arrived. We waited and waited until we were happy with the exchange rate.
Right.
She's bought the property while she was out of the country, all compliant, no delays, all in plenty of time. She didn't even have a Euro account in Portugal open at the time. One of the other problems with Bank of America was the only way to do it was to send the monies directly to the solicitors. But because the monies were going to an account not in the client's name, Bank of America wouldn't do it.
Right, because it didn't match up, yeah.
Because it didn't match up. But we took the view, but it's going to a solicitor's. It has to go to a solicitor's. So as long as it's a solicitor's client's account, and as long as the solicitors are legitimate, which we can check with the local Portuguese legal association,
right,
then there isn't a problem here. So there wasn't a problem. So we did it, and now they're busy enjoying themselves in their new house in Portugal.
I'll say this in the cleanest manner possible. You discovered basically what people don't research and what the institutions aren't telling people in order to make it best facilitated for the customer.
Absolutely.
Because the speed and convenience of just walking in and do it, be done with it, and you're like, here, you have a potential to put a stop to that whole process. And the fact that you cornered this. When I was reading about it, I'm like, there, because you see so many people on YouTube who do, like it's not. It can come across as, I don't want to stutter here, you're the real deal, as opposed to a 20-second YouTube clip of some 20-year-old millennial who swears up and down that this is something they can do. Just send me your money and I'll fix it for you, right? You know what I mean?
Just to make it 100% clear, okay, there's a very logical, cold business reason why we do things the way we do. Okay, it's not out of the goodness of my heart. It's not because I'm a wonderful person. Okay, forget all that. There's a cold, logical business reason, and it's this: my competitors get virtually all their business through marketing, advertising, pay-per campaigns.
Yep.
That costs a fortune.
Yes.
Since day one, since we started on the 1st of July 2020, we have not spent a penny on marketing.
That's crazy.
All our business comes from word of mouth referrals.
That's amazing.
Wow. We have to earn that. Yeah. If we don't look after you, you're not going to use us. If you're not going to use us, you're sure as hell not going to refer your friends and neighbors and work colleagues.
Absolutely not.
So we have to look after you to the best of our ability to A, have a chance of you using our service, B, have a chance that you continue to use our service, and C, have a chance that at some point I can say, Rashad, do you know anybody else who...
Of course. And so, exactly, and that's the thing, right? So that's what made it so fascinating, right? So you have a Cosmo currency exchange, and I'm like, obviously that's not my wheelhouse of life. But it's like you just don't see this advertised as a whole, something like that, because most people will go through Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, and they don't get that personalized service. I do have a question for you though. How did the UK leaving the EU affect like currency markets in that line of business? Because they're not pegged to. You guys have the pound, right? But how did that impact the business that you're in?
It impacted heavily, and is still impacting now.
Wow.
So initially, the pound took a real beating because of the concerns about the loss of trade and pretty much like what we're seeing with Trump's trade tariffs at the moment.
Can that be undone? Can the Brexit be reversed?
It can be, but it will never be, because whoever tries to do that will be political suicide. Because it was a referendum. Okay. It was a referendum.
Okay.
And as referendums go, I remember going back into my sort of early days. In the 1990s, there was a referendum in Canada about Quebec wanting to secede from Canada.
Yeah, that was like 96, 97, yeah.
And he went to 3 recounts because the final result was 50.1 against 49.9. The Brexit referendum was 52.7. So you're talking about millions of votes of difference. Right. So there's no doubt.
Right.
There's no doubt whatsoever. The problem with Brexit, from my point of view, and I am completely apolitical. Right. I'm not sure I should say this, but I will, because I'm talking.
This is why I have this. This is the No Agenda show, but this is raw, unfiltered. I want to hear exactly what you have to say.
My grandfather, when I was a kid, said to me one day, I'm going to teach you a foolproof way of knowing when a politician's lying. So 2 hours later, he's laughing his head off at my childish ideas and what have you.
Yeah.
And he eventually says, right, stop. My ribs are hurting from so much laughter. It's very simple, son. When a politician's lips move, they're lying.
Oh, jeez. Right, like everybody's waiting for
It doesn't matter if there's red, blue, green, yellow, purple. They're all the bloody same. Take it in view. Always ask yourself, what's the angle? Never mind what they're saying, but where are they going with it?
Correct.
So that's always stuck in my head. So I'm completely apolitical. Okay? I've always voted all my life because I feel we owe a duty to those that came before us. Because
to be involved in the process.
Exactly. To have the democratic right, I think it's a privilege.
Right.
We're not talking about ancient history. Until 1974, people in Portugal didn't have the vote.
Yeah, that's nuts. What's crazy too is obviously, until, its neighboring country, for instance, Franco, right? Like people think of Spain. I haven't been to Spain, but like that was a dictatorship less than like 50 years ago, right?
It was
All
Portugal.
of South America had dictators in it, right? Like you're like, oh,
in the 80s.
you start doing your history research, you're not too far away from like, hey man, the general of that country ran the show, and if he didn't like you, there's the field that unfortunately all the bodies are buried.
You get a knock at the door at 3:00 in the morning, and the neighbours don't see you again.
That's it.
Absolutely. I know people.
Oh my God. Oh,
because there isn't a Portuguese family that doesn't know someone that happened to. Because the Portuguese dictator was in power for over 50 years.
And this is the part too, and I say this very respectfully because, when people do history, you hear about, obviously dictators are horrible, but you'll hear about, your Mussolinis, your Hitlers, and then there were some other really bad people that if you don't go down the wormhole, kind of get lost in the pecking order of who else was in charge, right? Because you may only hear about one or two, like, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, you hear about the Stalins and the Maos and Hitlers and Mussolinis.
Yes.
But as you said quite rightly, there's Franco in Spain, there was Salazar in Portugal,
there
was Boxer in Albania, and
yeah.
And it's not that long ago, 50
not
years
that
ago.
long ago. Not that long ago.
But one of the things that, to answer your question about Brexit, so the real problem with Brexit, because us human beings are very adaptable. So never mind the political rights and wrongs of Brexit. Let's put that to one side. The issue is we voted, we're out. Has that caused some friction? Yes, it has. Has that friction kind of calmed down? Yes, it has, for the big companies. But here's the practical problem for Mr. and Mrs. Joe Public. Before Brexit, a British person selling a property in Spain and moving back to the UK, they would sell the property, the money would be in their Spanish bank account. To move those euros back to the UK would normally be a flat fee of about 20 euros.
Didn't even notice it happened. You just get about right.
Post-Brexit, because the UK is outside the EU single market, the Spanish banks now like to charge 1.5% on the volume. So if you sell a small apartment for 200,000 euros, which doesn't get you a lot in Spain these days, okay? You're looking, instead of a 20 euro fee, if you go through the bank, you're looking at 3,000 euro fee just to transfer the money. That doesn't include the cost of conversion. Unless you know somebody like me who will go, what are you doing? You're selling in Spain and you're bringing the money back to where? To UK. Right, stop. Register with Cosmos.
Right.
We have our dollar account in New York. But we also have a euro account in Dublin in Ireland.
Right.
And Dublin in Ireland is still inside the EU single market. So moving funds from Spain to Ireland is the same as moving funds between two Spanish accounts, as far as the banking system is concerned. So they can't charge you a percentage fee. So that automatically saves the client 1.5% on the volume. Plus the benefit of the funds coming in and me picking up the phone and say, Mr. Woods, your euros are in, however, it's not great rate at the moment.
Correct.
But this and this and this is happening in the markets. If you're prepared to wait, our opinion is that it might improve for you in the course of the next 3 days, 7 days, 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever the case may be. And then it's up to you to make a decision, but at least you're not going in cold and just going, I don't know.
I'm just going to deal with whatever's in front of me. I do have one final question. What's going to keep some of the major players from saying, you know what, I'm going to open up my own little Cosmos as a subsidiary? Because they always do that. You'll see like a small competitor, and you will literally be like, where did this company come from? And then when you start looking at, the articles of incorporation, you'll find out that it's really backed by Lloyd's of London, right? And you'll be like, oh, okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. So, are you concerned at all about this model being replicated?
Yes and no. I'm concerned because it's almost certainly has happened, will happen again, will continue to happen. Not really, for two reasons. The first one is that the quick way of making money in my industry, quite frankly, is to do the complete opposite of what I'm doing.
That is true.
The quick way of making money is get the latest technology. You pay for the technology once, you open up, you've got no overheads. You don't employ staff, The problem with employing staff, human beings, is they want to get paid every month, not just the once.
Right. As opposed to getting a software platform that you're just having to do upgrades and pay software for service.
And that's it. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And also the management levels at my competitors tend to be people in their 50s and 50s, mainly 50s. Mm-hmm. If you extrapolate backwards, the internet really started kicking in around 2001.
Right.
Which means most of the people in my industry,
that's all they know,
don't know that life existed before the internet.
Right.
So they don't have the skill set. They don't understand customer service.
Right. And they're going to say, why are we investing in agents and people to actually provide this personal service?
I can't tell you how many times throughout my 35-year career I had a monthly review, and in that monthly review, you will go like this. Right, Tony. Well, good news is you've hit all your KPIs and you've hit all your targets. That's good. Mm-hmm. But why do you have to spend so much time on the telephone speaking to your clients? Why do you have to know about their granddaughter and their pet dog and how the grandchild is doing and how their football team's doing? Why? Just do the business. Just make the money and go.
And it's like, well, that's how they keep coming back into the door. That's how because then when they're, so I have them, then I get, their kid comes in when they're 18 and start working. They bring their girlfriend / fiance in there. Then they have a kid. And then, so like by me having that personal relationship, and here they are looking for the transaction.
And it happened throughout my career. I've still got clients that I've been dealing with for 25 years through different jobs, even before I set up Cosmos in 2020. Nice. They never had a problem coming with me because, quite frankly, they don't care whose name is above the door. All they knew is they could pick up the telephone and say, Tony, I need to move some money. You let me know in the next 6 weeks the best time to do it. And just forget about it completely.
One phone call.
Get on with their lives, knowing that I'm not going to play games like it's coming towards month end. So now's the right time. Yeah? Which is what happens with all the big brokerages. It's coming towards month end. Now's the right time, Mr. Wood.
Wink, right? Yeah.
Because it's no commission. Now, don't get me wrong, I have bills to pay.
Of course.
But I also recognise you're not stupid. If I do that to you, you're going to go, but I didn't need to do it so quickly. Why did I get bounced into doing it? This Tony's really got my interest at heart on his own.
Oh, yeah. People will go home and have that conversation with that significant other of theirs and say, okay, and then.
Of course they will.
Yeah.
Whereas, they know that I don't care about month end. If you told me you need the monies in Spain by the end of April, and I think that on the 5th of March the rate's rubbish, but is likely to improve, I'm not going to waste your time trying to bounce you into a deal because it's not right for you. I wouldn't do it if it was my money. So why should I ask you to do it? Simple.
For sure. I love that business model. And, and when you reached out to me, and I'm like, full disclosure, when I saw Cosmos, I was like, where's this conversation going? Until, because I just had and then I'm like, Cosmos, because, with all, I say this, I know we're wrapping this up. There's so many people that are financial gurus right now that it's crazy. Ever since Bitcoin, Dogecoin, whatever coin somebody does right now, right? Everybody's like they got their Instagram video and they got their fake car and their fake jet behind the background. I can solve all your problems. They're this, and you're just like, really? Like, seriously? But then I researched you, right? And then I started looking. I said, man, this guy's the model and the examples and the people and the testimonials. Like there's meat on the bone, so to speak. And so that's what this T.R.O.N podcast is all about. I would never have gotten a chance to talk to somebody from Plymouth, UK, courtesy of Mozambique and Portugal. The wormhole I get to go down talking to people like you is priceless. It's awesome.
That has been great. Thank you very much for your time and for the opportunity.
I just want to ask, say this. I always ask everybody this. Where can they find you? They don't need me.
The website address is very simple, www.cosmoscurrencyexchange.com. There's a contact us page there. And that's the easiest way to do it. And I will always. It also means that I'll call the client to save their phone bill. So that's the easiest way to do it.
Tony Redondo, thank you so much for your time and thank you for being on the T.R.O.N podcast, brother.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.